Welcome to Industry Tech Days 2021, brought to you by Tech Media and All About Circuits. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, your host. Welcome to the last of the event. I've been waiting all week for this specific keynote session so I could spring some tough questions about component lead times on our panel today. That's coming up in just a moment. This week has been a blast. There have been so many fantastic sessions and keynotes, and if you've been here since day one, you're a rock star, and we are going out with a bang today. This event, Industry Tech Days 2021, is a 5-day virtual free conference and trade show for engineers and technologists. We've had an incredible keynote guest each day, and today we have not one, but 3 folks joining us. Much like the previous days, after this keynote is a set of live sessions with industry experts, professional training, and Q&As. Time is also running out to visit the 30 different digital booths on the virtual floor. Head over there before they are gone. We are also on the brink of giving away prizes to 100 people. Those prizes include a custom branded soldering mat and t-shirt, and one grand prize winner's lab is going to be kitted out by Digi-Key Electronics. That winner will get a fully loaded InstaLab kit with test gear, tools, components, and more. Improve your odds of winning by signing up for more sessions. There were 50 sessions this weekend today. Some are live and coming up after this, and there's a ton of on-demand sessions you need to see. Find them on demand by going to allaboutscircuits.com and clicking the Industry Tech Days link and scroll down the page. You'll see all the sessions there. I'm personally excited today for the last session on the schedule, Machine Learning with Microchip. It's a great opportunity to keep up with the latest trends in that space, and machine learning is just constantly growing. Today's keynote is brought to you by Winbond, a leading global supplier of semiconductor memory solutions headquartered in Taiwan. Their customer-driven memory solutions include specialty DRAM, mobile DRAM, code storage flash, and Trust Me Secure Flash. For more information, visit www.winbond.com. If you've been living under a rock, you maybe haven't heard of the chip shortage. But if you've tried to do almost anything other than live under a rock, especially anything electronics related, you certainly know about the chip shortage. Every industry from automotive to industrial automation is feeling the effects of it. And if you're like me, you've been screaming into the void about long shipping times and wondering when it's going to end and just why. Let's redirect those questions from the void to 3 titans of the silicon industry who are here live to share their perspective on supply chains, component lead times, and the lessons we should and must learn from this whole experience. Please welcome Dave Doherty, the president and CEO of distributor Digi-Key Electronics, Steve Sanghi, the executive chair of semiconductor manufacturer Microchip Technology, and Michael Knight, the corporate senior vice president of business development of distributor atTTI. Well, thank you all for being here. I am really, really excited for this session. Can you each tell me a little bit about your backgrounds, what you do at the companies you're in, and your place as a company in the semiconductor supply chain? Steve, let's start with you.
Certainly. Microchip is a semiconductor manufacturer that has a very broad product line consisting of microcontrollers, microprocessors, FPGAs, and then all the other chips that go around it to complete the customer solution, like analog, mixed signal, power management, all of the connectivity protocols like USB, Ethernet, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and discrete products, everything really needed to complete a solution around the microcontroller or processors. Microchip sales run rate is about $6.5 billion a year and a market capitalization of about $42 billion.
All right, Dave, how about you?
Sure. I should complete Steve's. He's being humble, though. Steve's been leading that ship for a long time and now is chairman. And growing up to the operational side, I've had the pleasure of knowing him over a couple of decades. Now, for Digi-Key, we're a distributor, so we don't manufacture anything. We partner with manufacturers like Microchip to provide a host of solutions to customers. A little over 2 million parts in stock. Our claim to fame is really that availability and high service, if you will. You won't find a lot of Digi-Key people out on the street, but many folks are familiar with previously the catalog and now the website. representing over 1,500 or so manufacturers. And again, most people knew us early on as the engineering playhouse. I used to describe us as Toys R Us for electronic components, but since they filed Chapter 11, I try to refrain from that example a little bit more recently. But and then, going from the engineering desk to that short-run production, companies like Keysight Technology, where they may not make a gazillion like you would an iPhone, but you're looking for that availability and service.
All right, and then what is your role at Digi-Key?
Yeah, I've been president here for the last 7 years. I've been with the company for 13, and I've had the advantage. I've been in this industry since the mid 80s, graduating from school. It certainly made me older. I don't know about wiser, but I have had the vantage point of working as an engineer, as a consumer of electronic components and a supply chain recipient, to being on the manufacturer side, to this last half of my career on the distribution side.
Awesome. And Michael, how about you?
So Michael Knight, I run the semiconductor portfolio at TTI, which is better known for interconnect passive electromechanical. But a few years ago, we started down this path of taking our model, our distribution model, to the semiconductor world. Once upon a time, this model was very pervasive. Companies like Unique and Mimic and Insight and others, specialty semiconductor distributors. And over the years, as the industry's consolidated, especially led by some of the bigger public distributors, those options have been removed for both customers and suppliers. So we thought there would be a market for kind of a blast from the past. And so we've put together what's called actually the Exponential Technology Group, in recognition of the exponential nature of technology, especially driven by leading edge semiconductors and leading edge semiconductor suppliers. So I've been responsible for building that out the last few years, and it's not only a classic distribution business, but there's some stuff as a service business in it. We've got design services, a lot of stuff that's very focused on helping customers design in the latest and greatest stuff. And then the idea, of course, is to pull the IP&E stuff in behind the semiconductor stuff we're working on. So the company in total will be well north of $6 billion this year. And it's in 2004, I think we were acquired by Berkshire Hathaway. So we're actually a Berkshire Hathaway company, for those who haven't heard of us.
Do you have Warren Buffett on speed dial?
Yeah, it's no. Actually, the better question is if Warren has me on speed dial.
That's a fair point.
I'm sure
I
he
hope
does.
for your sake that he does not. Yeah. Now, with this group of people, we have to talk about the chip shortage, and that's been a very real part of anyone in engineering. Like, that's just top of mind as you build out a BOM, as you go through and design for a part, and then you have to change it out on the fly. Mike, we'll start with you on the chip shortage. Is it limited to certain markets like automotive, or is it more of a broad-based issue? And are there any sectors that are especially hit?
So the headlines all around automotive, but to your question, it is much more broad-based. But the automotive thing definitely overshadows and has a big bearing on availability for other market segments. I mean, it's looking at, as a data point, the automotive in the U.S. light passenger vehicle production in 2017 peaked at almost 18 million cars. This year, it's going to be closer to 14 million. And of that 14 million, as many as 4 million may not actually be able to ship or be sold to an end customer because it's missing parts. And it's right now, typically, the gating item is going to be something semiconductor related, especially in microcontrollers. The average car these days has something like 1,400 semiconductors in it. So lots of opportunities to have a problem. If you're missing just one of those 1,400, you may not be able to ship the vehicle. So this is getting a lot of attention, and it seems you can't get away from it. I mean, this week alone, both Volvo in Gothenburg announced that they were going to have to shut down production because of chip shortages, and Nissan in Tennessee. But this is a much bigger thing. It's in mobile phones. Anything that uses semiconductors is potentially being impacted, and that's I honestly I think that's only going to get worse before it gets better.
Okay. Yeah, I remember hearing an interview with the designer who developed the Tesla door handle that pops out, and that alone had its own microchip and bootloader and all that. So the breadth of it was, I think, not lost on folks. Dave, have you seen this in other components like passives or connectors? Are there, is this across industry, or is this more kind of on the semiconductor side?
No, clearly, and I pinged Steve earlier because he gave me some insight about 6, 9 months ago that I thought was very insightful, and asked if he'd share it. But I'd say to Michael's comment about automotive taking the headlines for the end customer application, semiconductors have taken the headline, but it's not the full story. The carryover effect has been huge to other areas like capacitors and magnetics, timing devices, resistors. And the reasons for this there's a multiple reasons. First of all, some of these parts use semiconductors, so you have the whole issue of building blocks. If you can't get the semiconductor timing device, it's tough to produce a temperature controlled crystal oscillator. And the materials, and I'll pause real quickly because I know there's a lot of frustration out there, and I don't want people to. There's almost anger that we can't get parts. The folks on this, Michael, Steve, myself, our companies don't succeed unless our customers succeed. So we're truly trying to help in this, but you look at, there's been some force majeure that's been causing constraints on resins, whether it's nylon or liquid crystal polymers, metals, precious metals, commodity metals. All these are building blocks for the components that we source. And then, to add insult to injury with Murphy's Law, we've had droughts in Taiwan, and you think, well, what's a drought got to do with it? Well, water is a huge component in manufacturing these parts, and a lot of them come from Taiwan. We've had fires that have affected certain factories. We've had countries impacted by COVID that have had forced factory government shutdowns. And so this is this is the perfect storm, if you will, that we're seeing, that initiated with semiconductors, but certainly we're seeing constraints across the portfolios.
Steve, can you elaborate on that? What sort of, can you comment on like the availability of materials like masks and photoresist and how that impacts the ability to get semiconductors out the door?
So let me size the problem first, with some data points about the shortage. So, in our quarter ended June 30 of this year, our net sales were $1.57 billion. On the top of that, we were delinquent to customers' request for about 50% more of that number. So if the availability of products was to be unlimited, we could have shipped 50% more than what we did. That's kind of one size of the problem. Now, if you look at the total backlog, if you consider the backlog pre-pandemic to be normal, let's say prior to the pandemic, if whatever the backlog was, if you were to call it normal, today the backlog is 4x that normal. And that raises all sorts of questions from investors and others, whether it's all real, whether there is any double ordering. The backlog is scheduled out. It's not all in one quarter, but it's 4x normal. It's just absolutely enormous. The third data point would be lead times. Pre-pandemic, our lead times on most products were 4 to 8 weeks. Today, every critical product in the company has a lead time of 52 weeks plus. There are, parts that are available in 6 months or less here and there. So largely, if the customer hadn't planned that far ahead, then we're largely busy helping customers, get around and really substitute the products, re-engineer it, use an alternate product with more memory, more features, less features, figure out some way to really use some other product that happens to be available. So, getting to shortages of materials and all that, we're not getting shortages in photoresist or wafers or those things we had planned well. We had plenty of supply of photoresist. We have our own mask shop, so we were able to make the masks. Where we saw shortages was in lead frames, which essentially come out of metal, and lead frames are heavily short. Substrates, for advanced products, it's a multi-layered substrate on which you flip the chip and bond it. Those are, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months lead time, sometime a year. And then also, as Dave described, all the metals and chemicals, and there are kind of shortages everywhere. So if you hadn't planned well ahead of time how much you're going to need in this upturn, then you're dealing with shortages and lead times. And direct labor, by the way, direct labor, I wanted to mention, in all of our factories in US, we cannot find a direct labor to ramp the capacity. We are limited in output by direct labor, not equipment, because government essentially gives you the money for not working more than if you were working in the factories. So at least for a direct labor perspective, waiting for all these unemployment benefits to go away in September is critically important so the people can come back to work for the factories and ramp the production.
And to kind of reverse the order here, what sort of timeline are we looking at to get back to a more normal state, or is this just the state of engineering for a while? And Steve, we'll start with you and work backward.
So I think you hear various inputs on the timeline, but I think it's reasonably clear that these will persist at least for another year. So middle of next year, maybe things start to open up. People will always tell you, some people will tell you that semiconductor cycles have been repealed and this is new normal, and these shortages will be there forever and prices will only go up, and there'll never be enough capacity. And those pundits have been wrong for 40 years. Cycles come, this will end. There will be there'll be overcapacity, and cycle will go down, and all the things will go the other way. But I think it's minimum we are here for a year, and possibly the rest of 2022.
Dave, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, Daniel, I don't know there's much more I can add. I think Steve is at the front end of this, and he probably has the best vantage point. I can tell you that to Michael's earlier point, we're not seeing any signals that this is reversing anytime soon. Capacity gets added in big chunks, in particular on semiconductors, because you get big items like fabs that provide a step up. It's hard to linearly increase capacity. And Steve's mentioned some of the unusual constraints like labor that don't typically exist. So there's so many external factors that could weigh into this. I will say that I do have confidence, Steve and his counterparts, this industry has proven remarkably resilient. And we have been through these cycles, and we will get through this again. But I don't want that to sound like any level of complacency on our customers' part. They play a critical role by giving us accurate forecasts, because a lot of this in every cycle typically starts with unforecasted demand. Michael talked about the automotive statistics. Look where we were last March and April of 2020. Companies weren't shipping anything. And so to go from a complete stop to a full ramp up just isn't practical for anybody.
That makes sense. Yeah, Michael, did you see this sort of thing coming, and how do you handle it in the trenches here?
Yeah, so we did to an extent, because it's logical when you have a pullback like we had during COVID, that there's going to be a snapback afterwards. So we were actually preparing for this middle of last year. What caught us by surprise is just how robust the snapback was. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, both to the question about when do we come out of this, when do things start to normalize and lead times start to retreat, which is, as Steve and Dave have talked about, there's a lot of components there, but the simple answer, I think, actually is what's the longest lead time item? And for semiconductors, it's a fab. And there's a lot of talk about this, but I've seen thing. People talk about 2 to 2.5 years from the ground up for a new fab these days, because it's not just what it was typically, it's what it is today, given labor scarcity, raw material scarcity. So there's a lot of stuff that has to be planned for that's kind of outside the norm. The other thing about that I think is really interesting is, where we're talking about adding new fab capacity actually happens to be places where there's not a lot of water, which is kind of a mystery to me, given what we're learning about the situation, TSMC situation in Taiwan. So the other thing related to all of this is climate is having a big impact. Long before COVID, climate was kicking the snot out of the supply chain, because the supply chain has clumped up in places where there are people, and people, oddly enough, have clumped up in places where the climate has gotten very erratic. So I saw some stats. The last ones I saw for 2019 were that climate change alone had caused about $150 billion in revenue loss in the supply chain. I think when we see the 2020 numbers, it's going to eclipse that. So you have the pandemic effect, which we haven't really talked about. That's a wild card. The pandemic's got Malaysia shut down. So anybody that's doing back end or has a fab in Malaysia, which is a lot of power semiconductors are coming out of Malaysia, that stuff was already problematic, and it's gotten more difficult. You've got the ongoing trade dispute with China and the ramifications of that, which are now spilling over into Taiwan. I'm very nervous about what's going on between China and the U.S. with respect to Taiwan. You've got the fact that the semiconductor equipment guys their backlogs are at record highs. Well, you know what they need to build their equipment is semiconductors. You talk about a catch-22, right? Then you've got all of the inputs, the raw material stuff. Copper is up like 80%. Packaging is up since COVID times, 50%. The packaging. So in IP&E, even before COVID, the packaging often cost more than the parts that were in the packaging, especially when it comes to things like a reel of resistors. So that's just been exacerbated. So this is an awful lot of stuff to sort through and has to get back in sync before we can get back to something that's normal. And I would throw on top of all of that, there's the economics of the situation from a component supplier standpoint. So call it the last 50 years, the expectation from the customer base has been they're going to get more for less. And it's been a constant margin squeeze, especially on the channel, quite frankly, but for everybody in the supply chain. And this is obviously costs have gone way up, and there needs to be a rebalancing and I think a realignment of incentives for the supply chain in order for us to dig out of this, in order for us to reconfigure the supply chain where there's not as much inherent risk related to climate and everything else. So one of the things that I think is really interesting, and I think Steve's probably in a really good spot to look at this and watch this, but I think the supply chain leaders, folks who have a lot of leverage in the supply chain, there's an opportunity here, and this is not going to be a very popular thing for some people to hear, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's a little bit of a tough love thing going on with the customer base now, because the customer base has been single-mindedly focused on quarter-on-quarter cost reduction, understandably so. And by the way, we're all beneficiaries of that, right? Because the TVs and things that we like to buy have gotten less expensive. But that has a lot to do with the situation we're in right now. Day sales and inventory for the supply chain historically have run about 40 days. And that's just not enough of a safety net when something goes wrong. But yet we had shortages in 2018. And did anything change in the supply chain? From my point of view, it didn't. I think the silver lining on this has got to be that this is enough of a shock that we start to modernize and evolve the way our supply chains work, because most of these things were designed and built 50 years ago, and they are just not adequate for this environment.
Okay. Yeah. Dave, it seems like you might be stuck in kind of a pickle with you have engineers calling you saying, "Hey, I need my parts," and you have suppliers on the other end saying, "We're doing what we can." Can you talk about how your life is like kind of stuck in the middle, being an aggregate voice of the customer and an aggregate voice of a supplier?
Yeah, it's a great question. Life used to be, in hindsight, pretty simple for us. We were shipping product off the shelf. 98% of the shipments came from inventory. There wasn't much backlog to have to manage. We'd be inventory rich, and we thought that was a challenge. But boy, what we've seen, our in stocks are at historic lows, and that challenge of trying to get it in. I think what manufacturers value is our partners are typically pretty close to their large OEMs. They know the needs of the Fords or Boeings or Apple, and we try to be a voice of the masses and try to provide some context around those voices. And it's helpful. A year ago it was, hey, we've got some customers trying to build ventilators, and we need some of these products. The point was raised earlier. Hey, we have some customers. They may not be a household name to you, but they're making the equipment that's building the fab for you to produce more chips. So we've got to source, and we've got to help these folks out. So to many of our customers, they don't have a direct communication link into the manufacturer. It's through us. And we do our best to do both, support this FIFO, take care of the folks that get their orders and their backlog in on us. But there are exceptional stories all the time that we try to communicate. It helps us all through this time. Communication is absolutely critical.
Steve, if you could go back in time 2 years ago and tell yourself something, what would you be saying to yourself in like 2018, 2019?
I always love to go back in time, but I haven't found who can sell me that time machine. I got the check ready. The hindsight is always 2020. The two major events that happened, the US-China trade war in 2019, followed by the COVID of 2020, which is still continuing, those two events were not predictable. Absolutely not predictable. So when COVID hit in March of 2020, my investors, my board, and analysts were all asking, and Steve, what happens if your revenue goes down 35, 40%? What would happen? And we were carrying a pretty large debt load, which we had amassed when we bought Microsemi in 2018 with $10 billion in cash. And we had a fair amount of debt and high debt leverage. And they were asking me to do the analysis. If the business were to go down 40%, do you miss the covenants? How will you pay the debt? And, what would happen? So, what was Microchip to do? We took steps which we will do to prepare for the down cycle. We drew down our inventories. We put our factories on attrition. We reduced our capital expenditure. We didn't replace people when they left, and really did everything needed to conserve cash and kept paying debt. So, if the worst happens, at one time we described that as a possible category 6 storm. There's no such thing. Category 5 is the highest. But if there's a category 6 storm, we still come out on the other end of it alive and can recover from there. So that's really, we cut the salaries of our people worldwide. We zeroed out the bonuses. Executive team, starting from me, we were on a 20% salary cut. So we did everything to save cash. And then that storm never came. Our business really never went down. From a baseline of March 2020, our business was only down 1.3% in June. That's nothing. And then September was slightly up, and then it started growing from there, and we ran into these shortages. So if I could go back in the time machine and say that the worst we're going to have is a 1.3% impact in our revenue, then I would not have done any of those things. I would have continued to invest and replace the people, run our factories full, and actually prepare for the upturn that was to follow. and not have these kind of lead time. So if you ever can sell me a time machine, I'll pay a lot of dollars for it.
I'll start working on it. Yeah. Dave, were there any indicators that this was coming? Did you see in the market or in, reporting, economic reporting that this type of thing was going to be upon us, or was it a bit of a, I know it blindsided a lot of people. It's no fault of their own. Can you talk through that?
Yeah, I think it's a very similar story than what you heard from Michael and Stephen. Actually, we started seeing steady growth occur in June of 2020. We hit kind of a quick spike, a quick panic button that Steve described, and then we started feeling pretty good that the bottom wasn't going to be catastrophic. We also have the luxury of being totally private with a single owner, and so we went to him and said, "Hey, we're seeing these signals," and so we started building our backlog and frankly, building inventory of A and B items. So for a private company that's not getting that pressure on inventory, if you have some extra A, so what? With the cost of money nowadays, it's just a matter of time to burn it down. So we thought we were actually in a pretty good position January with our inventory having grown nicely. But again, as been described, keep in mind, we ping each other, and the forecast at the end of last year, consistent across the industry, was low to mid single digits. So we kind of pegged that at 5%, and we said the market we're in is typically a little stronger. We'll plan for 10% growth. Different factors, but just as Steve described, we didn't ramp up because we just saw none of these factors hitting to the magnitude in which they did.
That makes sense. Michael, have you changed processes on your side at all, and any thoughts on, maybe what we could have learned from 2018 and what we are hopefully learning now in 2020 and 2021?
Yeah, we haven't, in that our model actually has always been built for this. And I think I can safely say Digi-Key's model is the same. So we actually do pretty well through these rough patches in the cycle. So all of that said, I think there is a lot of stuff to be learned here that's got to be incorporated going forward, because one of the things that's really obvious to me is that COVID has been an accelerator. And the important word there is accelerator of a lot of things. It's an accelerator of Industry 4.0. It's an accelerator of the digitization of human interaction. It's an accelerator of a lot of things. And why accelerator is so important, what that implies is this was happening before COVID. So I have actually for quite some time been a strong believer that coming into the 2020s, that things were really going to start to ramp in technology, because electronics in particular is becoming so pervasive in everything. So we do a lot, for instance, in wireless and IoT, and everything's getting connected to the internet. There's tons of data now that's being generated. I saw a stat that in the last 2 years, we've generated more data than all of the rest of human history combined. So all of this suggests that the demand for electronic components, which are the foundation of all of this, is going to grow exponentially. So if you accept that as a premise, then you do have to make some really interesting decisions in a really tough time. You're going to have to bet on the future, because from our point of view, I view a distributor as insurance for the supply chain. So inventory is an insurance for the supply chain, right? So think about it. Think about it this way: we all have cars and we all drive. In the course of our lifetime, we're going to spend $150,000 to $200,000 a year for insurance, and none of us like doing it. And most of us, we're never going to have to use it. Most of us, thank God, are never going to have an accident. But our industry has actually been motoring along with very little insurance for a long time. So this is the single biggest thing I think the supply chain has to deal with going forward. We've got to figure out how to ensure the continuity and the resilience of the supply chain, because the things that are shocking it They're not momentary. As Steve pointed out, there's some black swans for sure, but there's a lot of other stuff that is now happening regularly enough. The deep freeze in Texas. That we've got to kind of pull our head out of the sand and look at the reality of this and start making some different decisions. So to directly answer your question, that's what we're doing right now. And honestly, this is complicated, and we don't have all the answers. But I do think we have a pretty good set of questions now, and that I believe is a good starting point.
So that was an interesting thought. It's almost like distributors act as a bit of a filtering capacitor, smoothing out some of the fluctuations. Dave, do you agree with that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Totally agree, and I think that's it's a non-contested fact that this role is critical. And when you start thinking about the complexity of supply chain, companies are always going to be motivated to try to run as lean as they practically can. And as Michael described, we've probably gone beyond practical. And so I think customers, rightfully so, have multiple relationships depending on the situation. And so distributors, especially ones like TTI and Digi-Key, we hold inventory, which has become a little bit of a misnomer for many industries in distribution. It's about how do you get it in on Tuesday, ship it out on Wednesday, and we recognize that that's a value proposition. That customers are willing to pay for that insurance, and that's just one small piece of what Michael was describing. Just to maybe come back to it a bit, our purchasing customers, maybe you're too good at what you do, because it was part of an issue a couple of years ago with MLCCs, and I think we're seeing it now with resistors. Resistors are so darn cheap. If you're a manufacturer, what are you going to produce? You're going to produce products that you can produce profitably, because that's those are the laws of business. And so I think maybe purchasing people have had the mindset that my supply chain will tell me when I'm pushing too hard, and perhaps we haven't given those right signals, which has thrown some of these situations out of balance.
Is this a just-in-time manufacturing program or problem, or is it a bigger issue? Is it a mindset?
For me, just in time is a neat buzzword that's been around for a while. We're always going to have supply chain, right? Customers are going to need products. They're not going to want to hold a year's worth of inventory, and so whatever you define as just in time is going to take even improved communications, because let's face it, the customer's ability to forecast their end demand isn't going to get any better. With we've got manufacturing techniques now that can turn on a dime. And so what we see customers is wanting to sample the market, micro manufacturing methodologies to test it, and whichever hits, they want to turn to quickly. And so now we're going to have to be thinking differently. How are we going to give ourselves more flexibility? In the design stage, can we leave ourselves open to accept a potentially wider array of types of products? Are we aware that the complexities of tolerances or voltage range or temperature range, and how do we build that in? When I came into the industry, I was a component engineer, and that's kind of what we looked at. That role has evaporated, which is fine if we can use good tools to get some of that flexibility back, so that we'll never have the perfect balance of supply chain information, but if you can be nimble. And we're seeing customers now getting to the point that they're actually redesigning modules in their systems. I think it's a host of things, and I would echo what Michael said. It's going to take some conscious discussions and for us to face these new realities, and when we do that, we'll be just fine. But we've got to get our head out of the sand. I'll steal Michael's line.
Sure. Michael,
Yeah.
Video and wireless products are a big part of TTI's distribution. When COVID hit and everybody started working from home instantly, I remember trying to find a couple webcams for my team, and it was just like, and no one has them in stock. What's going on? So did that impact your business, and what opportunities did that provide for you?
Yeah, it has, and I think it's probably given lift to all of our businesses. This whole the trend towards let's just call it wireless communication, and again, that was something that was building momentum pre-COVID, and COVID's been an accelerator. So for sure, and it's in everything. You've got connected toothbrushes, which you could argue, do you really need to be getting data off your toothbrush? On and on and on. And this too is going forward a massive driver for all of us. That's I think pretty exciting. This concept of a connected world. So, and we're seeing it's not just land-based terrestrial stuff. We've got a lot of content in these low Earth orbit satellites, and these companies who are on a mission to connect all 7.5 billion of us to the internet, which is, pretty mind-blowing when you think about the size of the resulting human network and the potential of that. That's very inspiring, and I think going to be a big economic driver of the future. So, the wireless stuff is awesome for us, and I would say the interesting thing about it at this point, I'm sure Dave and Steve can talk to this in a lot more detail than me, but what I'm finding is that the OEMs, the people who are on this journey, this IoT journey, oftentimes don't have the skill sets resident in-house to sort through all the different wireless protocols and make a decision between long-range Bluetooth or new 5G for industrial applications. So there's a knowledge gap between the people doing the applications and the technology that's available today, which creates a lot of interesting opportunities to add value for all of us. And that's will be a big focus in my company for the next couple of years, figuring out how to jump in and help close that gap, and in essence add a lot more value to our supplier relationships as well as our end customer relationships.
And I think in another world, this panel discussion would be more about like 5G and Industry 4.0. So I'd like to look for some silver lining in this, COVID chip shortage cloud. What sort of opportunities do you see for your companies going forwards in the next 18 months and even in the next 5 years? And Steve, we'll start with you.
So I think, as I earlier said, Microchip is a very broad line supplier of microcontrollers, processors, FPGAs, and all the connectivity protocols, discrete chips, and power management, and other things that go around it. And we also sell to multiple markets. We sell it to industrial and medical, automotive, consumer appliances, aerospace and defense, communication, PC, data center. So, being a broadliner and selling to multiple markets was really very helpful during the whole COVID crisis. For example, at the height of the COVID crisis in June last year, when our industrial and automotive business came down substantially, our medical and data center business and PC business took off. Example, 18 months ago, I never heard of a ventilator. I didn't know what a ventilator was. And then I discovered that we were designed into ventilators around the world. And a typical hospital will only have 2 ventilators because they hardly ever need it. And then every hospital wanted 3,000 ventilators. We got so much demand for chips into ventilators, it completely swamped us. And then, digital thermometers, temporal scanners, oxygen pumps, all that stuff that is required in medical screening and dealing with COVID and all the issues just absolutely took off. That business was probably, up 50x or something. Same thing with working from home. As people started working from home, many employees that only had a desktop at work needed to be fitted with a portable PC at home, along with upgrading broadband routers, having a camera, being able to print at home. So all that part stuff took off. Company after company put their data on the cloud, so it doesn't have to be maintained really in their own servers, which will require people to go to work. So the cloud business took off, and that's the data center chips we ship into that were really, ramping like crazy. And then all the people working from home in their spare time for entertainment, the gaming part took off. And as the people had more money because they were not driving and they were not buying clothes to go to work and all that, people were not taking vacations, people had a lot of savings and extra spending. And people invested all that into buying toys that had electronics in it. whether they are toys, gaming toys or whatever. And so all that combined, really being a broadliner as well as serving to multiple markets was so helpful that we actually had a record year ending March 2021. In the middle of a global pandemic that we haven't seen for 100 years, with the worst being down 1.3% in the June quarter, and the ramp that followed ended our fiscal year ending March 2021 to be a record. So I think we
Definitely.
see further growth in that same thing, being broadliner and being in multiple markets. And now opportunities are coming like crazy in electrical vehicles, self-driving, more features into everything. So I think that's what's been helpful.
Definitely some silver lining for you there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Dave, we'll get to you in a second because I know we have some exciting news on your end. But Michael, how about you? What do you see going forward 18 months and even 5 years?
Yeah, so it starts with a fundamental assumption that I don't think anybody actually in our industry could argue with, which is we're never going to use less processing power, less memory, less components than we are using today. It's only going to go up. And so, with that in mind, I mean, it's a remarkable place to be. How they're going to get sold, who the winners are, who the leaders are, remains to be seen. There's obviously our industry is well known for kind of continuous disruption. And I am actually a believer in this concept of disrupt yourself before somebody else does it. But one of the things I love about that is it creates opportunity. Wherever your place is in terms of share or how you rank, tomorrow is a whole new game when you have this kind of growth. And then so the second kind of truism that comes with that is this rising tide lifts all boats thing. So I am crazy bullish on the future, and we've had a really phenomenal past that I think the future, and I'm talking near future, like this decade, we're going to completely eclipse what we've accomplished in the past. I'm very confident that a lot of the companies that we deal with, a lot of the suppliers that we partner with, are going to continue over the next couple of years actually to set new records, which is pretty mind-blowing given some of the records we have already set that we're already setting. The economic projections for this year show the global economy growing 5.6 to 6%. That's the fastest growth rate we've had pre-recession in the last 80 years. I mean, and 2022 is already being forecasted to be a strong up year on 2021. So this thing's got legs, and technology and electronic components are a really important piece of that. And now I think it'd be hard to argue that we're not a really important driver of it. So I'm crazy optimistic. Doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of bad days, and there's not going to be some ups and downs and all of that. But the long-term curve is strongly up and to the right.
Great. Now, Dave, can you speak to the future for Digikey? And I understand there's some big things happening for you right now.
Yeah. It's exciting times. It's this COVID. What's interesting is this has affected people in such different ways. So many industries devastated, the entertainment, the travel, et cetera, and then others. We're talking about a boom and constraints, not able to meet the supply. And one of the silver linings is increased customer reach. More people find you when they're looking for products. Our customer count will grow at a far away, even higher rates than our revenue is growing, which bodes well for the future. And we get excited and we're all in. This is one of those 2 years from now, if you look back, you say, what would we do differently? We're doing it now because we believe everything that Steve has shared. Michael in the past has led the industry association for a number of years and gets a vantage point across a multiple number of manufacturers and distributors. So I think what you're alluding to is we're just on the cusp now of launching our new warehouse. It's at 2.2 million square feet. It's 4x our current footprint. And again, because I believe these other speakers on here, that the long-term prognosis of our industry is boundless. Now, will there be cycles? Yeah, we'll be talking about the 2018 and the 2020 and the 2021 and who knows, a 2025 uptick in a recession. But if you notice over time, despite those sinusoidal waves, every time I put a mechanical key into my home to unlock the door, I know there's at least one more application for electronics.
Fair enough. Well, we're starting to wrap up on time, so I want to ask a couple fun questions here. And Dave, I'll start with you. In early 2020, everyone was hoarding toilet paper. So I have to ask, did your household hoard toilet paper? And in retrospect, is there something else you should have been hoarding on the electronics side?
I will say I was surprised that my wife got to know both the UPS and the FedEx drivers on first name basis because the number of shipments that were coming to the house. And I'd say we have it all right now. We've got enough toilet paper and hand wash for the next 20 years. So I'm looking to recreate some space in our home. So I don't know if there's any more we could have hoarded or built, but that's where we stand right now. We're in a remote area, so e-commerce, we took advantage of the Amazons of the world and anybody else that we could get product in the door.
Fair enough,
Michael. I think indoor plumbing is right. It's only been a couple years since indoor plumbing even got to Thief River.
And electricity is right on the way, Michael, right behind it. So yeah, we're bullish.
Is your new warehouse going to be also in Thief River?
It is, right? We actually built a bridge across the street, and we're in a pretty remote area. And the question around labor force that Steve mentioned earlier, for us, our PDC is the heartbeat of the company. And when we planned for it 5 years ago, we assumed it would be in a bigger geography, but we started asking ourselves that, unfortunately, some people do need heart transplants, but nobody does it voluntarily. So we like the challenge of continuing to find the labor pool up here, and the work ethic in this upper Midwest is like none that I've ever been a part of. So the community rallies behind us. It's a fun story up here. Winters are long, but people bond together.
Michael, any hoarding confessions, and is there anything that you wish you had hoarded or are starting to hoard now?
Yeah, so it was a timing thing, right? The sooner you figured it out and you hit your grocery store, the better, or you hit your Costco, the better. And my wife and I actually got a little bit of a jump on this. So we were in pretty good shape, but like a lot of people, I think we probably over inventoried. So I need to work off a little inventory, but it's the unexpected stuff that's still hard to get. We're talking about electronics, but there's a lot of other day-to-day stuff that have long lead times. We're like a lot of people waiting 6 months to get a piece of furniture. But the thing I wish I had hoarded is my favorite candy from a kid is a Clark bar, and I had a couple boxes of Clark bars going into the pandemic that I chewed through pretty quickly, and then discovered that I couldn't get any more. So I had a Clark bar drought that went on far too long, and they're still hard to get. So it's the little things the little comfort things.
Daniel, we should offer to help Michael, because if he's hoarded too much wine, that his wine cellar would be a place that we would like to take more access to and have.
And so, I actually keep the Clark bars in the wine cellar. So in the event of an emergency, I've got all the basic needs covered.
So that's the price of admission to the wine cellar, is a case of Clark bars.
There you go. Perfect.
Steve, how about you?
Well, my wife was holding toilet papers and frozen food items in the refrigerator and freezer like crazy. And I said, why are you doing all that? And it's just, there was paper and everywhere. And if it was me, I would have run microchip factories at full speed and bought all those semiconductors the factories will produce. That as CEO, I didn't want to store it within Microchip, but I would have bought it from them. I don't know what the disclosures would be with SEC and all that. That would be a challenge. But if you could get around that, I could have bought all that millions of dollars of product and hoard that in our store and garage and all that rather than the toilet paper. And today it would be worth gold. I would have made so much money
Fair enough.
that it just was incredible. And toilet paper, we didn't make any money. We used it all.
So all the supply chain folks were well stocked going into the pandemic. So next time I see you at Costco with a big shopping cart full of product, I'll know to stock up myself. Final question for each of you: is there any pet's probably the wrong word, but any line you carry or any chip you manufacture that has a special place in your heart? And can you share why that is the case? And anyone can chime in here. I can see the wheels turning.
I honestly, I don't have a favorite, and of course that's in my position. That's probably the intelligent answer. But truly, it all has. We're very deliberate about how we build our supplier relationships and construct our line card for particular applications. And we're not a broadliner. We don't have everybody. And so the ones we have, we're really engaged. The suppliers we have, we're really engaged with. And I wouldn't trade a single one of them, quite honestly. They all snap together to create something that's pretty awesome. Dave, of course, is going to have to cuddle up with Steve here as a starting point. So let's just get that out of the way, Dave.
No, my answer was going to be easy. It's parts are like kids. You love them all, but you like some of them more than others at certain periods of time.
Fair enough. That was very, very. That was a good, safe answer. And who you are, I think, is the way to follow that up, right?
Well, rather than picking apart, I think I'll pick a quote from Andy Grove, who once said that, bad companies fail in a crisis and good companies survive through the crisis and come on the other end. But great companies get stronger through the crisis and come on the other end, even stronger than ever before. And I think you are certainly seeing 3 companies here on the panel that have come out of the crisis even stronger. I think our customer relations have gotten stronger, and it's not that we didn't deliver every part our customer wanted. We didn't. Of course, there were lots of delinquencies, but how we treated the customers and how we did that better than our competitors were able to do, and how we were shown empathy for it and help them find parts sometime in distribution, in brokers, or help them redesign the part with a substitute product. I think we came out of the pandemic not only as a company with a record sales, and this quarter we're up 25% over a year ago, but that is coming at record gross margins, record profits, and record appreciation by the customers, even though we're letting them down with delivery challenges, but we're still the best compared to the others.
Fair enough. And as we wrap up, you have all worked together, bumped into each other at trade shows, interacted for decades, from what I understand. This is now your chance on the record to share a maybe embarrassing story about each other. Does anyone have? I hear Michael might have some pictures stashed away. Anything you want to get on the record here?
I like my job in this industry too much to share with you all the dirt I have on Dave and Steve. So I'm going to take the 5th.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, I don't think you'll get, Daniel, no takers there. That's dangerous turf because we all hope to be around for a little longer as well.
All right. So next time we see you at a trade show, we'll open up the bar tab and have a conversation. Well, thank you all so much for your time. It has been a real pleasure to speak with all of you. Thank you for your wisdom and insight.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
What a great way to wrap up our keynotes. I hope that was as informative for you as it was for me, but if I'm being honest, I still might hoard some components when they go in stock. I'd say what they are, but I don't want you to beat me to them. Thanks again to Winbond for sponsoring today's keynote. You can check them out at winbond.com. There are a few more live sessions left today and a bunch of on-demand ones waiting patiently for you to come register for them before this event ends. A huge thank you to all of you who joined me and the Industry Tech Days team for this event. If you want more, you should come join me for Season 3 of the Moore's Lobby podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and mark your calendars for Industry Tech Days 2022, happening next year from September 19th through the 23rd on All About Circuits. On behalf of EE Tech Media and All About Circuits, thank you for joining us. I'm Daniel Bogdanoff, and I'll see you next time.